My mother's fiance stole my $7,000 college savings, and my mother told me to shut up, so I had them arrested. It turned out that my father had left me a huge inheritance, and my family is living off that money, so my mother and her fiance were arrested recently. My mother's side of the family hates me for it, because I called the police to have them arrested, and I had good reason to do so. My mother and I have never gotten along, especially since my father died 10 years ago. I'm 17 now and will be going to college in a few months. Unfortunately, I always knew that my mother would never leave me any money, so I had to work for myself and make my own arrangements. I started working when I was 14, doing part-time jobs after school. I have been saving for the past 4 years so that I can leave at least a little something behind. Relatives often give me cash as a gift on my birthday, and sometimes at other times of the year too, so I save that too. So far, I have saved almost $7,000, which makes me very happy. Of course, it's all in cash, which I keep safely hidden in a small corner of a cupboard in a wooden box my father carved for me. I don't have a bank account because my mother never allowed me to open one, so that was out of the question, but I never told my mother or anyone else about it, so I don't know how anyone else found out. A few days ago, I found out that the box was empty, and when I asked my mother, she told me that her fiancé had invested the money in a new house. When I found out what had happened, I completely lost my mind. There was a fierce argument in the house, and I stood on one side, my mother and her fiancé, but in the end I was 7 years old, and they were in power now, so I had to give in. The only thing I could do was go back to my room and lock myself in, crying for hours, because this is my life. I had to start all over again. I wasn't even sure if I would be able to save enough money to do anything before university. I was really very depressed and completely lost. That day I made up my mind that I would definitely get revenge on them, because this matter could not be just let go. Although the matter was big, fortunately, I got my revenge 3 days later. They had been arrested and were paying for the crimes they had committed. My only problem throughout this whole thing was that my grandparents, who had always been on my side, were now on the other side, and that made no sense to me. My mother's fiancé, whom I call Rob, has been in my life for 2 years now, and I have hated him every minute of that time because he is one of the most horrible people I have ever met. I would even go so far as to say that he has abused me, not physically perhaps, but verbally and emotionally definitely. My mother usually took the brunt of it, but occasionally he would lose his temper with me too, saying whatever came into his head. He cursed me and tried to make me cry, just like my mother did, and he became even angrier when he realized that I didn't care. This caused him to lose even more control over his tongue, and my mother never bothered to defend me against the things he said. My father died a few years after my mother stopped dating anyone, but then she met Robin. He was nice and tolerable at first, but then they had their first big fight, and that's when he started to show his true colors. Within a few months, he had already started manipulating my mom and got him to move in with us. He is an incompetent, lazy idiot who can barely hold down any job. He is in his mid to late 30s and still occasionally relies on his parents for money because he has absolutely no sense of finance and often wastes money much more than he earns. When he quarrels with my mother, he gets money from his parents, and when he doesn't, he gets enough living expenses from her. The sad thing is that my mother is not a billionaire, and she cannot afford the extravagant life her partner wants. She is the floor supervisor of our local supermarket, and although she can earn a considerable income, it is not enough for Rob's kind of life anyway. I never let this bother me. From the age of 14, I tried to avoid asking my mother for anything except the basic necessities. When I started working part-time, I stopped asking her to pay for these things. I didn't ask my mother to buy me anything. The only things I relied on her for were probably just shelter and food. That was it. I don't ask her to do anything extra for me, nor do I ask her to give more, because I know that it would be pretty stupid to expect that. She made it very clear from the beginning that she didn't like me, and even when I was a child, she was always mean to me. I always felt that she didn't even want me to grow up, and this feeling grew stronger and became a belief, at least until I had my dad to support me and supported me against my mother. Whenever she got a little angry with me, my father would support me, but since his death, I've been on my own. In the past few years, things have started to get worse, but Rob's presence comforts me. I always comforted myself that soon I would go to college and then I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. For 3 days, while I was being robbed of my money, I stayed in my room and did nothing because I was so depressed. I moved into the new house and did all the things I needed to do, but I didn't speak to either of the two people I was living with, and they didn't seem to get any worse for it. On the third day, my mother told me that I had to get dressed in the evening because they were throwing a housewarming party, so I started yelling at her, telling her that I wasn't going to do anything like that because she took my money and they were only able to buy the house because they stole my money, which really annoyed my mother, and she told me that since we finally lived in our own house, not a rented one, I should be happy for them. I had to swallow my pride and let it go because I owed them my whole life. She had raised me, which didn't even make sense because it was her legal obligation to do so, and she hadn't done me any favors, and as for the house, it was too big for the three of us. I knew they had bought the house just to impress everyone with their upper-class address and spacious home. I was really depressed that day and did something I had never done before, so I decided to call my father's parents. This was a bit complicated because after my father died, my grandparents had distanced themselves from our family because it was too painful to keep in touch. I don't know why they broke off their relationship with us, we no longer speak, but I still have their phone number. I decided to call them as a last resort because my maternal grandparents were on better terms with me. In this case, the day I was robbed, I told my mother's parents because I hoped they could talk to my mother and help me solve the problem, but they just told me that they hoped my mother could buy a new house and they were happy about it. But the bright side was that we finally had our own house and didn't have to worry about the monthly rent anymore, so they told me to look on the bright side and find the positive in it. I thought their reaction was strange because up until now they have always been on my side. They would never say anything directly to my mother, but they would always sympathize with me. But this time it was completely different. I didn't understand their reaction, and I was so angry that I didn't contact them afterwards. On the day my mother told me to accept the reality, I decided to contact my grandparents in the hope that they would respond in other ways and at least give me hope for the future. It was just a gut feeling that told me to call them, so I did. Luckily, they answered the phone. As soon as they picked up, I told them everything that had happened. I told them that I know they were too sad to talk to us or to keep in touch, but that this was an emergency. If my dad were still alive, he would want to help me. I told them that my mom had taken all my money and that I had worked so hard, thinking I could afford to go to college, but now I didn't even know if I could go. I told them that my grandfather had told me, which confused me because obviously my father did leave a college fund for me, so he didn't know why I needed to save up any more money. This was new information to me because my mother had never mentioned it and I had never asked her because I just assumed she wouldn't leave me any money, but I completely forgot that my father may have done something for me before he died after all. He knew he was going to die, but he died too soon and I thought he probably didn't have time to take care of me, so when my grandparents told me this information, I thought it was really interesting. I was so angry and frustrated at the time, so I asked my grandparents if they had any evidence that they could send to me that I could use against my mom, and they told me that they had to look for some documents and call me back in a few hours. I waited in my room, trying to put all the pieces together, and realized that my mom and Rob must have teamed up to embezzle my college fund for their own use, so that they could buy this house, because it seemed to me that my mom didn't earn enough to buy a house. And Rob hadn't even worked anywhere for the past 3 months, so I seriously doubted that he could afford a house like this. I just need something to confirm this, and then I'll call the police. A few hours later, my grandparents finally contacted me and sent me photos of some documents where my mother signed that she would use the money my father left her to pay for my university and to make sure I have a comfortable life. When I saw this, I literally laughed out loud, because she did everything but make sure I had a comfortable life. In fact, I think she did everything to make my life more uncomfortable. Anyway, the fact that she signed these papers really makes me angry. My grandparents never mentioned any of this. They just abandoned me after my father died, and everyone abandoned me. My mother never really had my best interests at heart. My mother and grandparents tried to take care of me, but I think it was all fake. My father's parents were so immersed in their grief that they didn't have time for me. When I asked my grandparents why they had never produced these documents before, their excuses were far-fetched. They told me that after my father died, they kind of forgot about it and that I was too young at the time. When I grew up, we stopped talking and they forgot about it because they got old too. I had no choice but to let it go. But when I got the proof, I called a friend of mine whose father was a policeman and I told him I needed his help. That night, at the beginning of the housewarming party, my friend's father showed up with another policeman and a lawyer and arrested my mother and her fiance because they had obviously broken their previous promise. But the breach of promise put my mother at risk of legal action, as she had violated the terms of an agreement signed years before. I was at the party explaining everything to the guests when they were finally arrested. I consider this to be the most affirming moment of my life, because they wanted to impress people like some former colleagues and friends, and when they were exposed and taken away in handcuffs, even though they were too proud and arrogant at that time, they just stared at me as if I had done something wrong. My grandparents and my mother's parents were also at the party. They were really sad when they saw their daughter being taken away in handcuffs. After the party was over and everyone had left, they refused to speak to me. I was alone in the house and I didn't know what to do. I was devastated because even if they were arrested, they could be released on bail after a few hours, and even if I wanted to sue them, it would take months to prove everything, and even then, there was a good chance they would be acquitted. If they could turn the situation around, everything will turn in their favor. Who knows what will happen? Until then, I won't get my money back. So no matter what I do, I'll lose. And I can't sell the house either, because the title is in the name of Rob and my mother, not mine. Even if I wanted to force her to sell the house and give me the money through legal means, I would have to fight the case with a lawyer. Now I don't have to worry about the cost because my friend and his father have very kindly told me that they will take care of everything and I don't have to worry. They understand my situation very well because they are very close to me, but now I don't know what to do. What's worse is that the only people on my side are no longer talking to me. My maternal grandparents told me that they don't want to talk to me because I'm being ungrateful. They can understand that I don't get along with my mother, but that she has done so much for me and that something like this has landed her in jail is just too much for them. They don't want to have anything more to do with me, and that makes me feel really bad because I feel so alone right now. Although I have temporarily defeated my mother and Rob, in the long run, I may have already lost a lot. I don't know what to do now, and I feel completely helpless. My mother and her fiance were arrested for embezzling my savings to buy a new home. Update 1. Hello, I have moved out of the house that my mother and I bought together. The reason is that I reported them to the police a week ago, and they were released after 48 hours in custody. I rushed home as soon as I heard that they were back. I decided to move out because I didn't want to get into a conflict with them. I had packed everything in advance, and I had to leave, so they walked in and they tried to get me to stop and talk to them, but I didn't want to talk to them, so I left as quickly as I could. I called myself a taxi and went straight to my friend's house, where I have been staying for the past 3 days. It is worth mentioning that this friend is her father. I got out of the arrest and the lawyer, and now her father, the lawyer and I are sitting together every day to sort this out as quickly as possible. I am really desperate at the moment, so I am willing to settle. We have arranged to meet with their lawyer and client and the court-appointed mediator in a few days to see how the negotiations are going. But if they refuse to accept my conditions, we will have to take the matter to court, and that will take as long as it takes. I will do my best to reach a settlement, but I want to be fair and I need the financial support I need to finish my studies. My friend's father told me that I can expect financial support from them for now, but I'm a bit hesitant to accept support from other people because I feel it's strange. As for my grandparents, no one has talked to me yet. Apparently, my maternal grandparents and my father's parents stopped talking to me after I sent them the photos of the documents I collected. I collected these documents from them in person so that we would have some hard evidence, but other than that, we haven't had any interaction so far. Even when I went to ask them for the documents, they acted very coldly towards the whole thing, just wishing me the best, but not offering to help me, not even inviting me in to talk or do anything. I don't know what's wrong with them, their behavior is really strange to me, but in any case, so far things have been really disappointing. I just hope I can get over these difficulties soon so I can start university, which is the only thing keeping me going right now. And of course, my friends have been very supportive, which I really value because I don't have any family left, so they're the only ones who care. I'll update you. Hi, this is an interesting development. I don't know what to say anymore. I'm shaking with anger because I find this disgusting again. It's a bit dubious, but then my mother took a screenshot, so I don't know what to believe. Here's what happened. There were 2 days left until our meeting with the mediator, and just a few hours ago, my mother contacted me via email to tell me that she really needed to talk to me. I blocked her everywhere else so she couldn't contact me, but she created a new email account and sent me something that completely turned everything I thought was real on its head. I don't want to waste time, so I'll just get to the point. My whole damn family is conspiring against me. That's why my grandparents have been acting so strange throughout this whole process. They were in on it from the beginning. From the very beginning, my mother not only pocketed the money my father left me, but each of them took their share and kept quiet. In exchange, I finally understand why my maternal grandparents were upset when I reported my mother to the police, why they always pretended to care about me but never really stood up for me, because my mother had them over a barrel, and why my grandparents never told me about the existence of these documents signed by my mother, even before I asked. They were all involved, and my mother has provided me with evidence. She spoke to them earlier when I was 14 or 15. Fortunately, she recorded all these conversations, as they were all stupidly conducted via email, and she has sent me screenshots of these emails. She told me that since I had gotten her arrested, I should drag all these people down with me because they were the only ones who had conspired to deceive me and keep the money for themselves, while my father had left me a large sum of money. My father's lawyers included, they all thought it best to hide it from me and keep the money for themselves. I still can't believe this is happening. I reread the email over and over again, trying to make sense of it, because it's unbelievable that these people are all against me, even my father's own parents. It's just so shocking. The reason they told my mother to sign the documents and recently sent the proof to me was simply because their conscience finally found them. They changed their minds. They realized that their actions were wrong, and when I called them for help, they decided to confess to me. They had planned to do so a long time ago, but my mother and her parents convinced them not to tell me the truth because it would also implicate them, so they promised that they would not take the initiative to tell me everything, but if I asked them, they would definitely confess to me. They decided to send me those documents as evidence, and that was the whole story. I'm glad they chose to help me then, but that doesn't absolve them of their responsibility, and it explains why they still act so strange and distant even after helping me, because they feel guilty. They still can't admit what they did. They're actually ashamed. And they should be ashamed, but now my brain can't think anymore. I don't know what to believe or what to do with all this, and I haven't even told my friends what I found out, because it's so big it's driving me crazy. I feel betrayed, hurt, and angry all at the same time, and I don't know how to deal with these emotions. Now, obviously, I have to talk to my lawyer, because this is a huge development, and we will definitely raise this issue in negotiations. My mother is trying to turn the tables and fight against those who exposed her, but she forgets that she will also lose a lot because of this. I'm glad she told me this because I think I need to know that in this world there is no one to support me, maybe just a few people to rely on, and I can't rely on anyone. That's just the way it is. The only thing left to do now is to tell my friend, and for him to tell his father, and then we can all sit down with my lawyer and decide what to do about this and how to move forward. But whatever happens, I'm definitely going to college this year. And I've made up my mind that I'm not going to back down. I'm prepared to ask my friend's father for help, and I'm not going to ask him to pay for my college tuition, but I think I'll ask him to be my guarantor for my loan application, because I think that's the only thing I can do at this point. Update 3. Hi. We met with the mediator today, and as I said, I definitely mentioned anything my mother told me in the email, and she basically admitted to everything she did, so she has to come up with the money she and her family stole from me. But she also tried to claim some of it was also used for my upbringing, so we can't be biased against her, and we shouldn't expect her to return any amount. But she lied and said my grandparents needed it. They not only took the money from me, they also took my dreams and ambitions, and I demand they give them back to me so that I can live a decent life. I will not be dependent on them anymore. I have spoken to my lawyer and my dad's friends about this, and they say that such things must surely not be unheard of, but that doesn't take away from the cunning and the disgusting nature of this. They were as outraged as I was, and rightly so. They told me they would make sure I never had to rely on anyone for money for the rest of my life, because I would have enough money for every year of my past life that they stole from me. After my father died, he took every measure to ensure that I would live a happy life, but my family could not bear it, and they had to take it all away from me because they are so selfish. We don't have to sit back and let them do whatever they want, especially with my money. Things are getting pretty nasty, but one thing's for sure, we'll be seeing each other again. But this time my grandparents will be there too, because they're obviously part of this too. It might end up in court, but before that happens, I just want to get a student loan and deal with it. Make sure I get what I deserve and more. I want my money back that they stole from me, and they all have to pay me back because it was mine to begin with, not my mother's. But they also promised my father to protect me and make me happy, and they all failed, and I never want to see them again.